Well, thank you. And yesterday when I was going home from university in Berlin, accidentally I suddenly discovered a poster which said Wunderkammer. And apparently this was an announcement for a theater play in Berlin Center, Hackische Höfe. So I thought I'd go into this theater and ask what they mean by that. And it turns out they didn't actually know much about Wunderkammer. It's meant to be something wondrous, something miraculous, spectacular. But they rather wanted me to explain to them what Wunderkammer is. Now I thought on my back home, that's quite surprising about cultural memory, that something which had been completely forgotten, the Wunderkammer, the curiosity cabinet of the Baroque ages, apart from specialist historians, nobody was aware of that anymore. Now, suddenly it's present. We are sitting in a room which relives the Wunderkammer. So how can something which has been forgotten in culture be reactivated? Is it because of internet culture? Or is this a false memory, like Sigmund Freud would say? So I have developed a few ideas about that. And I hope with my very archaeological paper, and a bit of light, that's why I need glasses to decipher it. Now, let us revisit the Wunderkammer with media archaeological eyes and ears. In the visual aesthetics of user-generated web communication, in the so-called social media, the almost unarchival disorder of the Baroque curiosity cabinet, the Wunderkammer, with its unique combination of works of art, works of technology, and curious natural artifacts seems to return. Is this simply a superficial nostalgia for a non-classificatory, rather similarity-based order of things, as practiced in the Renaissance and the Baroque times? Or does this recursion indicate a deep structural affinity between Wunderkammer and the dynamics of the internet? So my talk will first critically discuss this apparent return and then try to positively interpret this remembrance as a symptom of a new techno-museological aesthetics, the algorithmic Wunderkammer. Let me start with a critical approach to the apparent return of the Wunderkammer in internet times. While the idea of the Wunderkammer had been forgotten in enlightened museological modernity, to the generation of social media users it becomes interesting again, because the miscellanea which are on display, as well as the way these heterogeneous items were displayed, seems not unlike the manner in which our digital archives and the web are being organized or disorganized today, as pointed out by Eloisa Amaral. What is the present nostalgia for the Wunderkammer a symptom for? Is it the fascination of the Wunderkammer for artificial nature, such as automata? In the curiosity cabinets, there was no ontological dichotomy between technology and nature. It was all one. While this was based on a theological conviction, all is God's almighty creation, without any religious belief, the same is true again for digital culture, when culture itself becomes virtual physics, like in computer games. The apparent disorder of the Wunderkammer in Baroque times was perceived as a hidden order of creation whose secret code was known only to God himself, exclusively. The digital Wunderkammer, on the contrary, exists without such theological background. Image clusters are organized by algorithms known to the human programmer. Thereby, the creative potential of the new Wunderkammer in the internet era carries within also a risk, the danger of endless freedom, of never having to formalize knowledge, or at least a new way to deal with information as content. The museological fascination regarding the Baroque Wunderkammer today is twofold. There is the anti-taxonomy of similarity-based order, And then there is its remarkable respect for the unnatural in nature and the artificial in terms of technology. In the Wunderkammer, naturalia, artifacts as products of human culture, and scientifica, the devices of human mastering of nature, such as astrolabes, clocks, automata, and scientific instruments, met in incompatible ways. All that is now separated in different disciplines at universities was in one room. Resemblance was central to the Baroque delight in paradox. But such union of incompatible distances, as expressed by Thomas Brown once, nowadays is calculated mathematically. To think in the presence of a cryptic Wunderkammer requires a calculus of combinations for inferring the connections among thousands of unknown aspects, like the algebraic generation of new concepts in Leibniz epistemology. It is this mathematically sublime aesthetics which Gilles Deleuze rediscovered with Leibniz in his book The Fold. The Baroque philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz is not just a contemporary of the European Wunderkammer, but its radical fulfillment and transformer. His differential calculus mathematized the wonders of God's creation and replaced the juxtapositions of things by algebraic formulas. Let us therefore articulate a veto against the current nostalgia for the curiosity cabinet. René Descartes and Leibniz once radically broke with the Wunderkammer epistemology of similarities in natural and cultural objects. They replaced both the ars memoria, the art of memory, and the collection of curiosities by calculating with numbers. Descartes criticized the category of resemblance as the fundamental experience and primary form of knowledge, denouncing it as a confused mixture that must be analyzed in terms of identity, difference, measurement, and order. Indeed, it is by means of comparison that we discover form, extent, movement, and other such things. The comparison of two multiplicities requires that they both be analyzed according to a common unit. Measurement enables us to analyze like things according to the calculable form of identity and difference. But even the so-called diadica of Leibniz, which is celebrated today for its reduction of mathematical calculation to binary numbers, was still presented within the frame of a religious view of God's creation, as expressed by Leibniz's words, wondrous creation from 0 and 1. The epistemic rupture is dramatic and should not be confused with present nostalgia. The present internet is a result of such numeric algorithms in the Leibniz tradition. What looks like a curiosity cabinet on the content level in the web is in fact an audio-visual or narrative dissimulation of data strings. The ratio behind the Baroque Wunderkammer was this: the strange configuration of objects in the curiosity cabinet, which looks contingent to humans, like the Chinese encyclopedia as described by Jorge Luis Borges and quoted in the introduction of Michel Foucault's book, The Order of Things. That made sense only from God's panoramic point of view. The ongoing epistemological irritation posed by the Wunderkammer aesthetics is this: does such a collection result from an arbitrary construction, or should it be understood as a ruined coherence, the remains of a greater whole, which the collectors might transform into a well-collected heap, as the traces of a bygone world? Are therefore the similarities between the objects and their affinities indices of an occult unity, which corresponds with a religious or paranoid perception? Or are such affinities strictly formalizable similarities revealed by pattern recognition? Today, we have a strange déjà vu experience when studying the Renaissance and Baroque curiosity cabinets. They immediately appear to have preformed present multimedia collecting, which leads Claire Preston to draw an explicit analogy between electronic search operations and the methods of the curiosi of early modern science and antiquarianism, with analogy itself being a figure of resemblance, as opposed to the Cartesian notion of difference, which can be mathematically calculated. Collectors in the 17th century imposed structure on the apparent disarray of the phenomenal world by searching for matches among the otherwise jumbled elements of their study. Systems of resemblance, visual patterns which may appear to us entirely fortuitous, were expressed by horizontal and vertical contiguity in the cabinets and illustrations. These efforts were driven by the belief that creation was coherent and that the task of the scholar was to uncover and display this lost coherence, a kind of theological archaeology of knowledge based on the assumption that what looks contingent to mankind is hidden coherence in God's eyes. What looks like a digital recursion of the curiosity cabinet in the internet is based on a complete disrupture by mathematical classification, a dialectical antithesis. Nowadays, it is the computer which deciphers images of the Wunderkammer as data sets. Once it has been digitized, visual contents of museums becomes alphanumerically accessible, and wondrous new options of mobilizing the inherent information by intelligent algorithms arise. The fact the storage of visual content in computer memory rather adopts the old St. Petersburg hanging of pictures at the wall according to spatial economy of formats rather than according to subjects or as historical sequence in period rooms. In the old Wunderkammer era, Montaigne once observed that some kind of similitude binds everything together. Toutes choses se tiennent par quelque similitude. But different to the Renaissance and Baroque museology, computers nowadays juxtapose images and sounds according to exact numerical neighborhoods. Do similarity-based algorithms of image and sound organization in the present correspond with Montaigne's poetic epistemology of the Wunderkammer? Did the Renaissance and Baroque curiosity cabinet perform an aesthetics of pre-multimedia-like collecting? Collectors in the 17th century imposed structure on the apparent disarray of the phenomenal world. Systems of resemblance, visual patterns which may appear to us accidental, were expressed thereby in the cabinets. Before the image world of today became a mathematical function of pixels, it was the museum context which was its matrix. The 16th century French philologist Dominique Ducange suggested that the word museum and mosaic were cognate. Even if this etymology was incorrect, what all such cabinets share is a semblance of resemblance indeed, in its insistence on idiosyncratically selected likeness. Their patterns are to be read as comparative juxtapositions, as a system of potential matches. Apparently, likewise, the photo aesthetics of a blogging platform like Tumblr today is literally based on the tumbling of images. What articulates itself here is the appeal of the unarchive, which is closer to the matching of items in the Wunderkammer than to the modernist archival tectonics. Economical display of paintings according to their sheer formats has not only been a practical concern in Baroque collections, but became the subject of paintings themselves, in the genre of gallery images as literary imaginary museums, as painted by Panini, Teniers, or Franz Franken II. I show you one of those pictures. This is a painting which shows a gallery of paintings of the Baroque time. When a photographic reproduction of such a painting is miniaturized on a classical Xerox copying machine, and then in return xerographically magnified again, it becomes subject to gradual anthropization. I'll show you how that looks. Make a copy of that picture on an old first. Now this is a sort of abstracted photocopy of it. This, if you minimize this on a Xerox machine and enlarge it again, this will happen. You minimize it and then enlarge it again, and then the contours dissolve. And that is the result. Entropy thereby becomes the aesthetic measure of a Wunderkammer display of such items. The informal value is the way media archaeology looks at the Wunderkammer representations, somewhat different from cultural or art history. What nowadays replaces God's knowledge within the Baroque theological worldview makes sense to the apparent disorder in Wunderkammers. Is the code which governs computer graphics, highly structured algorithms which define unexpected constellations. In that sense, media theorist Friedrich Kittler once predicted the return of the Wunderkammer. The ultimate digital Wunderkammer of today does not simply archive snapshots from the internet, but hardware architectures and software solutions as well, to preserve the validity of mathematical algorithms would be the new task of the future Wunderkammer. The apparent, because those are the wonders of creation of today, the clever algorithms which are being coded and which govern all our online communication. The apparent return of the Wunderkammer in Web 2.0, like the archival metaphor for the internet, is only superficial. On the infrastructural level, a complete transformation has taken place, from contingent objects to rule-governed algorithmic calculation. There is a risk that with a superficial museological renaissance of the Wunderkammer and the imaginary museum, the museum becomes a mere metaphor which loses its ground in real communication space. The Wunderkammer constellation of direct confrontation of a material artifact with the bodily presence of the beholder cannot be emulated by reproduction of virtual space unless the object is scanned in 3D and can be calculated in its visual vectors in n-dimensional space, suddenly becoming even more accessible than any object during a museum visit. The imaginary museum, as once defined by the French cultural minister André Malraux, once started with a reproduction medium of photography. You probably all know the archetypal image where Malraux stands within his own imaginary museum, which is actually like the 20th century version of the gallery image of an image gallery which we have just seen before. And this art of this imaginary museum became even more dynamic with Avi Warburg's Mnemosyne Atlas, which is based on the idea of permanent experimental reordering of photographic reproduction of artworks by iconological or other affinity. Only the lightness of the technical reproduction allows for such operations to be continued in algorithmic space. In a flash animation on the website of the former research project Searching Image in the year 2001, moving pixels on the top of the website associated each other by color similarity. For more sophisticated forms of visual rhetoric, nowadays the computer is much more capable. Techno-mathematical operations can identify the whole of an object from the side or parts of it. Still, the computer is no good in spotting associations between seemingly unrelated pieces of information or deriving generalizations of images, how to connect the single modules here in this installation. How can that be connected? The computer algorithms would not be able to do. Fuzzy computer sorting begins to make useful comparisons of similar but not identical images and objects on the basis of new protocols. But the strength of computing does not develop by just emulating human perception. Neurons in the human brain do not primarily process, recall, and transfer iconological content of images on objects, but rather patterns of visual memory. The image here exists rather in a structural, that is, pre-archival latency. The human brain itself operates by association, which is explicitly emulated by similarity-based retrieval algorithms like the Kohonen self-organizing map, the SOM, the SOM. The computer scientist Toivo Kohonen divides the memory models into the main categories: physical system models and information processing models, which separates the Baroque Wunderkammer from its algorithmic version in the web today. For current internet culture, WebSOM, a system which has been developed by the Neural Networks Research Center at Helsinki University of Technology, as a method for automatically organizing collections of documents and preparing visual maps of them, facilitates the retrieval of information by such similarity aesthetics. The self-organizing and associative memory model has been applied in the artist George Legrady's media installation called Pockets Full of Memories in the Paris Centre Pompidou in 2001, where visitors were invited to first scan personal items which they just had in their pocket, they put it in a scanning machine, and then to ascribe to them values by means of a computer touch screen with a preset questionnaire. The resulting values as database then led to the algorithmic placing of scanned objects on a large two-dimensional map. And that looked like this. And I'm showing you sort of a contemporary Wunderkammer. That looked like this. In the background you see how the objects were arranged, associated to each other after they had been individually scanned into the machine and tagged by the humans. On this visible surface, the imaginary museum did not place incoming objects in a pre-existing spatial order, but was in constant motion, driven by the visitors' tags to their individual object contribution, which were organized through the self-organizing algorithm. But this combination of user-generated emotional semantic content and computational method still confirms the human agency instead of being more radically driven by the distribution of pure shapes, pure textures, colors, etc. from the scanned objects themselves. The real archive of such objects is the strict Kantian a priori as a condition of possibility for enunciative statements. And this hides within the order of the Kohonen self-organizing map and stays strictly immobile. Against the metaphorical visible interface, which looks very Wunderkammer-like, a different map, an archival diagram, is at work here. But it's not visible to the visitor. What might look like randomness in the dynamic replacement and arrangement of visible objects in the internet or in art installations like this, therefore, is heavily structured on the deeper archaeological level of media operativity. And this is what the comparison between the Baroque Wunderkammer and the contemporary image collections in the web misses. The Baroque Wunderkammer did not have this hidden machine of mathematical codes which drove the arrangement of objects. And that happens today. A more radical version might order the digitally scanned objects according to purely formal criteria, by image-based sorting, such as order by shape or by color distribution. When applied to collections of art, historical motifs, or natural objects, the evolutionary order is thereby replaced by the differential drive to find similar stochastic patterns. Even if still tagged by human semantics, only once being sorted by algorithms in a data bank, such image or sound clusters invite to be analyzed in non-human machine aesthetics as such, statistically resulting in color histograms or in hybrids of color distribution and human labeling, which then Legrady actually did a few years later. He arranged in his second version like this. Now this looks already different. You see how here formalistic statistical values like color similarities combined with labeling create a different kind of non-ecological pattern. This is more mathematical aesthetics. This is the mathematical Wunderkammer as opposed to the simply iconological image-based Wunderkammer. With effective algorithms, for the first time, the image archive can organize itself, not just according to external human or even God's description, but according to criteria proper to its own data structure from the objects themselves, an endogenic visual memory in its own medium. By translating analogous photographic images, including film, into digital codes, not only do images become addressable by mathematical operations, their ordering as well can be literally calculated. It becomes intelligent. While the traditional photographic archive still represents a spatial order, today the online image archives themselves take place in time, processual time. Dynamic access to image archives is a flexible tool which allows for the coexistence of different orders without destroying the existing database structure. So let us finally look for the radicalized Wunderkammer. The Wunderkammer becomes more radical by media archaeological analysis when the term radical is understood in its mathematical sense, the square root, which you always know. Automatic feature extraction of objects in large digital image banks at first results in a Wunderkammer-like effect. Very often, what the cluster of feature reveals is rather puzzling at first glance, like the visual search engines you might use. Such probes have been assembled by the Brussels-based research art collective Constant, called Active Archives. Now, I show you what they produce. The histogram folder, for example. Now, this is the way a radically algorithmic, mathematically based way of ordering images of the world, how that looks like. It's between a diagram and statistical probability distribution. Now, this is the modern version of the Wunderkammer. By such a techno-mathematical operation, the ratio is revealed which replaces the Baroque God's gaze as supposed in the Baroque Wunderkammer mythology. While the juxtaposition of matching features can sometimes be understood by humans intuitively to look alike, in other image clusters, the ratio that connects them seems to evade human visuality and stays hidden in their algorithmic morphology. Nowadays, there are non-human visitors to the new Wunderkammer, which apply really distant reading. This is a genuine media techno-aesthetic gaze. Image-based image retrieval and sorting algorithms should not try to emulate high-level human perception or even to hermeneutically understand an iconological scene, but rather discover zones that have specific, unforeseen characteristics. The future might be the happy alliance or even convergence between the algorithmic output and what could correspond to human judgment. Now, my last words will be on the sonified Wunderkammer. Let us finally return to the core of this year's Ultima Academy and risk a look on nature by turning it upside down, shifting attention to the unnatural with a focus on sound. Several of the musical productions presented at this festival relate to natural phenomena from which composers derive particular sounds, algorithms, or compositional systems. Let me fold this focus on natural music upon the Wunderkammer itself, especially since the notion of the Wunderkammer so far has been almost exclusively related to visual objects and visual things, images. The current electrosphere, appropriately defined as synchronous acoustic space by Marshall McLuhan, separates the new Wunderkammer from its visually oriented historic version, since all is different when the Wunderkammer objects are sonic. That's why I was so happily surprised when I saw this installation this afternoon for the first time, and indeed most of the objects here are sound-based. The Baroque Wunderkammer lacked a sense for the dynamics of things. There was no sound in the Baroque Wunderkammer. But once nature is extended to the temporal regime and artifacts, a different kind of Wunderkammer arises. The transition to the sonic Wunderkammer happens when methods of digital archaeology as operative analysis are being used to sonify the image as memory itself, resulting in a continuously evolving composition. This is no deliberate but algorithm-based, rule-based, in strictly Foucauldian terms, archival transformation, giving a voice to the Wunderkammer, sonifying the artifactual collection. The natural itself can be given a voice, not only by the vocoder actually, by unnatural means. Now that's the dialectical situation. The Wunderkammer can be given a voice by the most unnatural, which is computer-programmed operation. For the following experiment of a sonified Wunderkammer, I have been inspired by Ryan McGee's, Joshua Dickinson's, and George LeGrady's multimedia installation called Voice of Sisyphus. In Voice of Sisyphus, a black and white photographic image from the 1970s displaying a hotel scene at the bar is filtered by a computer program which then reads the segments and produces sounds out of them. From a digitally scanned image of a Baroque Wunderkammer as well, several regions and items can be automatically identified and then repositioned over time, therefore allowing for the subsequent sonification of the items. Unlike the spectrograph approach used by most graphical synthesis programs, such an image-to-sound technique is derived from raster scanning of pixel data. By adding frequency domain filters, polyphony within a single image can be achieved. Sound spatialization filters and segmentation algorithms thereby try to make sense, sonic sense, out of the Wunderkammer in the signal processing point of view. Together with my colleague Johannes Maybaum, we converted digital scans of Wunderkammer paintings into its sonic equivalents as MP3 files. Can we switch? Based on defaults of the sonification software Photosounder, which, as a re-entry of the Wunderkammer as its diagrammatic image, can be in return visualized in its waveforms and frequency domain. On the y-axis of such a digitized image, each one line of pixels by means of parameter mapping is related to a defined frequency generated by an oscillator. Line by line, a spectrogram is being produced in which periodicities or non-periodicities can be detected. Now, before I play it to you, the Wunderkammer, can we see the image once more?
Which one?
The Franz Franken image, yeah?
Let's see.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, back to Franz Franken, the Kunstkammer, this one. Now this is the image. And now listen to the sonified version of this image. switch back. Maybe that's enough. By sonifying the otherwise spatial configuration of the Wunderkammer, its temporalization unfolds. And this is no more a museum, but music. Let us envision a really electroacoustic Wunderkammer, or a huge archive of sound items from both art, technology and nature. While the traditional Wunderkammer addresses vision, literally the visitor, the Ultima Academy addresses listeners as well, which discover real and imaginary connections between the music presented at the festival and the techno-mathematical culture. And I'm happy to say that I'm, again, positively surprised that all that I claim here in my text has already been put into reality in this present Wunderkammer. Thank you very much.